Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all those who have joined this special session. It's the inaugural session of a series called KM Global Network Author Dialogues. My name is Ved Prakash, and I'm the chair for KM Global Network. So before we start talking in more detail about the session, we have a very special guest over here, Tom Davenport. All of you have heard his name uh, for maybe a very long, long time. Let me spend a few moments by talking about global network itself. So let me know if you're able to see my screen. Madan, is my
Yes.
screen visible?
Yes, yes.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. So KM Global Network, as the name suggests, is a network of knowledge management networks from around the world. So today we are present in 38 countries, and there are 23 established networks which are members of KMGN. It's headquartered out of Singapore as a not-for-profit society, and it has been in existence for the last 12 years. The mission is very simple, making collective impact in the field of knowledge management. Right. And the genesis is that while we had individual knowledge management programs happening in localized regions or countries, but we were not able to really put forth our voice forcefully as a united whole. The vision is to bring prosperity to organizations and society through knowledge management. So that's the overarching vision that we have. We, within the networks, we basically conduct a lot of activities and events throughout the year in the form of projects and in the form of various initiatives. So for example, there is a small list that I provided over here to illustrate the kind of diverse work that is done through KM Global Network. So for example, we have set up a industry-specific KM Wiki, which looks at imperatives within a particular industry sector. And we have started with oil and gas. We conduct something called the KMGN annual course. So this is the 6th year running when we are conducting this course. On this year, the theme is on strategy and impact of KM. What is special about the annual course is that it's curated exclusively by KMGN members. It's a 6-month certification course, and it's very, very specific to and very something which members can resonate with. Right. Then we have something called the research community. So we conduct some 5 to 6 sessions around the year, where the focus is more on discussing on topics that are evolving in the area of knowledge management. We have author dialogues, and this is the inaugural edition, so doubly excited about that. There is a series that we started earlier this year on Know Your KM Tech, given the advancements that are happening in technology and how they have a direct impact on how KM can deliver value to organizations. You might be familiar with the ISO 30401 knowledge management standards. So KM Global Network is intricately involved in that particular exercise. We are coming up with an upgraded version this year. And there's a toolkit that we have designed as part of the collaborative effort of all the members so that you can implement it easily in organizations. We have started a new project called KM for Sustainability, which is looking at aggregating all the knowledge that is available on various climate change initiatives, because it's all heavily siloed. Another thing that we do is something called the KM Global Week. So there has not been really anything that brings together KM practitioners to celebrate knowledge in different ways. Yes, we do have some conferences and all that, but then we decided again as part of KMGN that we will conduct this global week. It happens in the 3rd week of October every year, and we have more than 100 events happening in different network members as well as globally. So you'll be seeing more and more posts around KM Global Week as we come nearer to the date. How can you connect to KMGN? One is we have a website and the URL is shown over here. Then we have a company page in LinkedIn. So you can join that page. I'll shortly share the URL besides the QR code as well in the chat window. We have a YouTube channel as well. We have a lot of different knowledge sharing events that happen, and we have different playlists where you can view the recordings of all of those, including the KMGN courses. So the overall objective is to communicate with each other as knowledge managers, collaborate on through various projects and events and conferences and activities, and co-create a lot of new knowledge, which you normally wouldn't find elsewhere. So with that, let's come to the main agenda for today, the KMGN Author Dialogues. Uh, the anchor for today will be Madan Mohan Rao. Many of you may have seen him in action across various events that he anchors. So he's, just to introduce briefly, he's the co-founder of MXR.world. He is the research director of Your Story Media as well. And he has authored over 15 books on knowledge management, innovation, and digital media. He also is an editor of several book series, very famous ones. He's a frequent speaker in international conference circuit. He gives talks, he conducts workshops, etc. And he has done that in more than 90 countries. With that intro, let me hand it over to Madan to take it forward. Thank you and enjoy the session.
Thanks so much, Ved. Thanks to everyone from KMGN for joining this session. Thanks also to my team at Mixer for putting this together. And a big thanks especially to all those of you watching this now on Zoom and on YouTube. This is being streamed live. I'll post that link also in the chat window. So it's such an honor for us to have Tom Davenport with us. As Ved mentioned, when I began my own journey in knowledge management many years ago, Tom's book was one of the foundational ones for me. It was called Working Knowledge, co-authored with with Larry Prusak. Over the years, I've seen many of his other outstanding books, such as Big Data at Work and the AI Advantage. His more recent book is this one, Agentic Artificial Intelligence, and it's a very excellent, very good book for all of you to check out. And Tom is going to join us today to share with us what happened in his first book, what happened in his most recent book, and everything in between. So, Tom, over to you to share with us some of your insights in the early days of knowledge management, where the field is going, and how AI is having a nice synergy with this. Tom, over to you.
Okay, thanks for having me, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I hope some of you can stay awake through all of this. So it's midnight in Australia, so that's impressive that you have that level of dedication to the topic. Let me share my presentation. Let's see, I don't know how I ended up on that page, but so I'm going to talk. I don't know if I'll discuss all of the books. I think I've written 27 books now, so I probably won't be able to talk about all of them on this presentation, but I will cover some history from at least the earlier work that I did on knowledge management to some of the more recent work involving AI, and we'll talk a bit about agentic AI for knowledge management. I was the co-author with, I think, 7 others of that book on agentic AI. And at the time, I would say we didn't have a lot of great examples of agentic AI for knowledge management purposes. The sort of organizing author, Pascal Bornet, had a newsletter that he produced with agentic AI on a newsletter on agentic AI, using agentic AI. So it would do the research, identify articles, create a little newsletter. A human would review it, and then it would send it out to all of the subscribers. So fairly primitive use, I would say, of agentic AI. Since then, I have encountered a few organizations that are more sophisticated than that, but we're still, I think, in the early days from an agentic standpoint. I'm also going to talk not just about knowledge. Certainly in the days of knowledge management, there were a lot of debates about what's knowledge and what isn't. I think in the broader population, there is probably more conversation about unstructured data rather than knowledge. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'll sort of talk about both things. Of course, all data has some structure, whether we're talking about images in the form of pixels or chemical elements in the form of the periodic table, or there are the structure of proteins and so on, and genes. We're probably most familiar with highly structured data like that in a spreadsheet. But of course, knowledge management has always been interested in relatively less structured data, I would say. Text, certainly, which has the structure of the alphabet and of sentences and paragraphs and so on. And to a lesser degree, I would say images and even lesser video. But now that those are becoming much more popular, I think as forms of data, there is certainly more interest in measuring them. What are we talking about when we discuss unstructured or less structured data, or in some cases, at least knowledge? Digitized books and articles, which there's no shortage of. I know I am currently involved in a lawsuit with Anthropic that is supposedly going to pay out any day now a couple of $1 billion to authors whose content was illegally scraped from the internet. I think, I'm not sure how much I get. Supposedly maybe $1,000 or $2 per book and article. I'm not sure, but in any case, that is quite common, of course, in the world of AI, scraping data of that type. Social media is also scraped. I think I read that Reddit is the single most scraped source for both OpenAI and for Claude. News, of course, widely used. Video increasingly used as a source of content for AI. And from a customer service standpoint, people are very interested in emails and texts from customers and suppliers to and from as a source of content. And then internal to organizations, of course, we have the usual suspects: email, lots of documentation of various types, policies. People are very interested in looking at human resource policies, for example, compliance policies in regulated industries. I have a friend who has a business that looks at legal documents and tries to extract the important data from them. Many legal documents are sort of, the content is relatively inaccessible because it's embodied in Word or PDF files or something like that. And their goal is to extract the relevant information and create more structure out of it. Employee digital conversations on tools like Slack. And it's interesting, I'm doing a speech next week for a large enterprise content management company. I never fully understood exactly what those companies do. I think it tends to be the more structured of unstructured content. Again, things like contracts and so on. But I will find out more next week. And of course, knowledge management itself is a source of relatively unstructured data. So I don't have to persuade you of this, I suppose, but this is a very important set of content. It's the majority of data. I mean, you hear these numbers bandied around that it's 80% of all data in organizations. We think that's true, but I don't think there is any good evidence of the exact percentage. And it all, of course, depends on what you count. Of course, it's important content because it embodies an organization's knowledge and intellectual property. It's more difficult to store and manipulate as compared to structured data. The vast majority, I would say, of efforts in the 50 or 60 years that we've been doing a lot of corporate computing has been oriented to structured data, in part because, it comes in rows and columns of numbers, and that's the way databases are typically structured. So there was a nice match there. Maybe some of you have been working with knowledge management since Larry and I published Working Knowledge, or even before that, we started working on articles and so on. But as you probably know, for many organizations, interest in knowledge management dropped off for a period of time. Somebody was castigating me on the internet the other day for having moved on to analytics from knowledge management. And I was working with Larry Prusak in we had a sponsored research at Babson, I think, which was also called Working Knowledge. And I just noticed, I think there was a recession at the time. This was in the 2007-8 range, maybe. And companies were not renewing their sponsorship of our research. And we had a couple of companies, but very few. I think Intel and the software company SAS were quite interested in how companies were using structured data and extracting data and meaning from that. And I did a research project under the auspices of the Working Knowledge Research Center, and got a lot more interest in what I was writing there than I did in knowledge management. So I stopped doing as much then. And I think it's fair to say that despite years of knowledge management, we've never fully succeeded at exploiting knowledge, in part because there was less interest and focus on the part of some companies. And I think it's important because generative AI can really help us to deal with it. It can create knowledge, it can help to manage knowledge, and certainly can be augmented by knowledge, and it's arguably trained on knowledge. So my own view of why knowledge management in the past was challenging, sadly, I think it's still true that some people don't really care all that much about knowledge. I'll say more about this later on, but I've done some work. It's going to be published, I think, in a week or two. Ironically, in a journal called MIT Sloan Management Review, which is itself an example of not caring about knowledge, because the current dean of the MIT Sloan School of Management has decided we don't need this journal anymore. And he actually said that younger people are more interested in social media and videos and so on, as if that was the only form of knowledge that a university should produce. In any case, this article is about how organizations are managing customer and market knowledge with the help of AI. And we interviewed a number of companies, and it was pretty clear in some of them, the organization just didn't really care all that much about what they had previously learned with regard to customer behavior or market trends or whatever. They were perfectly content just trying to, invent it all from scratch. The technology, I think, for previous knowledge management wasn't that great. I still hate SharePoint. I always hated SharePoint. So I think generative AI and other forms of AI and agentics as well can certainly help in that regard. I think companies found it difficult to find the content that they wanted, or people within organizations found it difficult. And it was, relatively easy on Google, and that I think was always a source of frustration for many. There were conflicting and overlapping versions of knowledge documents in many organizations. I worked for Accenture for a while. We had a quite active knowledge management program but if you tried to do a search for a proposal for an energy industry company on how to implement SAP, you might find 20 different versions of it. There just wasn't enough curation. So that form of knowledge management required a lot of curation, and people didn't necessarily provide it. Again, external knowledge was often easier to find than internal, and companies, I think, in some cases found it difficult to demonstrate economic value. Regardless of whether you think those things were true, I think judging from all of my indicators, companies were somewhat less interested in knowledge management until AI brought about some rebirth, in my view anyway. So this slide is a little bit misleading, and it sort of suggests that there is a process that is followed. That's not really the case. It's really a more of a laundry list of things you can do with generative AI on unstructured data. That's from maybe the more simpler forms of it, like answer questions and prompts, to the more complex versions involving, synthesizing knowledge and extracting it from documents and so on. But I think we all realize that there are many, many different things that you can do with generative AI for unstructured data. I was doing some research on how AI helps with customer relationships. And I don't know if it's my most recent book or whether it came out before the Agentic AI book. I can't remember, but it's called The New Science of Customer Relationships. And I was talking with a little company that I helped to found that does a lot of work with AI, and they were working with a supermarket chain in the southern US, and they had created a system that would deal with incoming emails from customers that would classify the content along various criteria, would send the message if it was relevant to the particular person who was responsible for that category. A customer might be complaining about some meat being spoiled, and so they would send it to the manager in charge of the meat department at the particular store at which the customer had shopped, and would then compose an email back to the customer saying, here are the steps we've taken, and you see, by the way, you complimented us for how we deal with our loyalty program, and we appreciate that, and we will follow your instructions and commend the person at the point of sale who helped you find your loyalty program number. In the past, we were never able to do that sort of complex sort of task with messages along those lines. I still remember years ago, I was working with companies on social media and how to make sense of social media comments. I think I was working with Marriott at the time, and they showed me a message that had been on TripAdvisor. The hotel was fine, but the pool was too cool. And there was such great difficulty trying to figure out, was that a positive or a negative comment? And in many cases, the tools that we had at the time were not able to even make that distinction, couldn't deal with sarcasm or humor or things along those lines. But AI is quite good, generative AI in particular, at all of those kinds of tasks. I suspect are all pretty familiar with RAG, retrieval augmented generation. I won't go into detail on it, just other than to point out it's by far the most common way that an organization can add their proprietary content to a large language model. It has a number of benefits. Context windows, of course, for large language models are getting larger and larger, but it's a way of getting around context window limits because you're not loading all knowledge in at once. far easier than fine-tuning the model by adjusting the weights, or certainly from building a large language model from scratch. A little bit technically complex, and that you have to get into embeddings and a vector database and a vector comparison with similarity search, and add the identified content to the prompt, so that the prompt can deal with that internal proprietary content. The first system that I really reviewed of this nature is I think I wrote the first article on how to do this in Harvard Business Review, or co-authored it anyway. But at the time, people were not calling it RAG, so I think we called it prompt-based tuning. But I wrote a lot about Morgan Stanley, which was an early adopter of this approach. And I asked my friend who was head of AI there, Jeff McMillan, he's since retired, who should I talk to about how you did this? And he said, oh, well, we had a guy who was a knowledge manager, and he was able to figure out all the technology necessary to make it happen, a guy named David Wu. So obviously, knowledge managers and the phenomenon overall of knowledge management has a large part to play in all of this. Another benefit: fewer hallucinations, saves money compared to submitting very large volume of tokens. And now that more people are using AI quite extensively, that's even more important. But it also requires a certain amount of data quality. In fact, Morgan Stanley had been very lucky. They a few years before generative AI was announced, pre-ChatGPT, they had realized that they had an intranet, and their intranet was fairly widely used, except there were many, many complaints about it, the quality of the data and overlapping redundant documents and so on. So they created a group, an outsourced group in Manila of 20 content managers, knowledge managers, whatever you want to call them. And they started going through 100,000, maybe even more at the time, documents, and making sure that they were up to date and tagging them and so on, all the things that you have to do in curation. So by the time generative AI came along, Morgan Stanley was quite ready. And in fact, they started working with OpenAI 16 months, or maybe it was 18 months before ChatGPT was announced to the public on November 30th of 2022. They got a big jump toward taking all those documents and making the content in them generally available for Morgan Stanley wealth advisors. So I wrote an article on this topic of data quality for RAG based on structured data in Harvard Business Review last year. And we talked to a number of companies who had done it. My co-authors, Roger and Tom, were old line data quality people. They still had some doubts about this whole idea of AI, I think it's fair to say. But clearly, the data needs to be relevant to the problem at hand. You need to get rid of duplications, because AI, as I say further down, is not so good at determining which documents are the best. You typically need humans with domain expertise. The information needs to be, complete and accurate and up to date, and in many cases extracted if you want to get maximum value from it, the salient aspects of it. A lot of organizations have rediscovered the ideas of tagging and knowledge graphs to improve content retrieval using RAG. I think people are starting to call that context, broadly speaking. You may need, for semi-structured data, names and so on, you may need entity resolution to make sure that you have the same name for the same thing. And clearly, we benefit from an unstructured data dictionary, but they're still pretty rare. I think it's just as valuable in unstructured data context as it is in a structured data context, with all the relevant attributes like ownership and who produced it and who's consuming it and so on. Anyway, a fairly complex issue. Still, not many organizations good at it yet. I would say this unstructured data management. Okay, so agentic AI, as I say, still early days. You find a lot of people calling their chatbots agentic AI, and I think they aren't really agentic unless they, use more than one AI capability. They involve some sort of workflow, and they have some sort of memory of what's happened in the past, which is typically embodied in a database. But agentic AI is clearly, since it does things and doesn't just, answer questions, it's quite useful for putting knowledge to work in more operational business processes. And, there are some knowledge intensive processes that are more common than others. Customer service, I think, the single most popular one. But agent can do multiple things. For example, they can check the accuracy of other agents. They can, in this Capital One example, Capital One, if you're not familiar with it, I think it's for some reason they've only succeeded in English-speaking countries, primarily English-speaking countries. But one of the more analytical companies from their birth, they had a slogan called information-based strategy, and would talk about IBS all the time until it became used for irritable bowel syndrome, which made it much less appealing as an acronym. But they do a lot with AI now as well, and so they created a call summarization agentic system for their customer service. Some of their calls for really difficult cases can last up to an hour, so summarizing them is not easy and important. It saves the agents a huge amount of time that they don't have to do the summarization themselves. Their agents check the accuracy of the summaries and make sure that the previous agent did a good job with that and tries to eliminate or at least lower the frequency of hallucinations. The other agents check for compliance with regulations. There are certain things you can bring up on a customer service call in a bank and certain things you're not supposed to. They extract key topics to make a statistical summary of, what are customers really calling us about that we need to address in our business. And another agent will feed customers' key issues into their customer relationship management system, so they have it available the next time they call. So you can see, when I first was talking to Capital One, I was confessed to be a little bit disappointed. This was just a month or two ago, that their primary example was call summarization, because people have been doing this for a while with large language models. I was a little bit surprised that you needed agents to do it, but seeing all the things that they do make me see that, yes, this really does require a set of agents kind of each performing a particular task, which to me is one of the definitional criteria for agentic AI. I have found other companies using it for managing product knowledge. We have a used car retailer in the United States called CarMax, and they have found that automobile manufacturers, when they talk about the capabilities of their cars, they use entirely different language. One might refer to automated ignition key as a digital key, and another might call it a mobile key if your mobile phone can do it. Anyway, if you're selling a bunch of used cars, you want to make sure that you're describing them in similar ways. So they've created an agent that goes through all the product documentation from the different automobile retailers and creates a common definition and with common terminology of it. Another one checks it, and then another one puts it into their product database. So again, you can see how that would be relevant. And last week I was at the MIT Chief Information Officer Summit, and the person who won the CIO of the year was from an electronics distributor, and he said they had done something quite similar with the electronics products from various manufacturers that they sell their products for. So I think product information, of course, varies a lot. Manufacturers don't do a great job in many cases of standardizing it at all. They think that they're getting competitive advantage, so they want their own language. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I'm doing this. I'm just finishing now, just about to publish a study on customer and market knowledge, which focuses not just on retrieving it, but also creating it out of experiments, extracting it from social media, testing it with digital twins of synthetic consumers, and so on. So there are some vendor tools that help with all of those things, and sophisticated consumer companies are starting to use it. So for unstructured data in general, we can't manage it all. So you really have to decide what's most important and already curated. If it's not sufficiently curated, you have to figure out who's going to do that. And ideally, when I talk to companies about this, they don't have enough people. They haven't hired 20 people in Manila to do this work. So they try to get people at the front lines who understand the business and understand the information used to do some curation as well. That was always difficult in knowledge management. I'm sure it will not succeed all the time in this case, but that's what many companies are trying to do. How do you get agreement on key terms and documents? That's still an issue. How much context do you want to provide? The more the better, but it takes a lot of effort. How much you rely on Gen AI to do a lot of the quality management, categorizing the data, tagging it, deduplicating it, and so on. It can certainly help in that regard. How do you institutionalize ongoing content creation of high quality so you don't have to do this? Morgan Stanley has tried to train the people who create the content to check to make sure it's not a duplicate and to tag it themselves and so on. And how much and how often will you validate that content? So if you're going to do this at scale, clearly, requires a lot of time and effort. So some of the lessons from classical knowledge management that I think still apply here. AI makes things easier to use, but it doesn't solve all knowledge management problems. I think my colleague, former colleague, now departed from us, Larry Prusak, was the first to argue knowledge flows matter more than knowledge stocks. And we certainly found this, for example, in this research we're doing on customer and market knowledge. Just creating a big repository is not the idea. It's how do you get it used in new product development processes, for example. So AI can help with creating an effective knowledge flow. You hear a lot of people saying now that we need to embed AI into our workflows. At least in the US, people don't like that term process anymore. They think that it's too bureaucratic or something, but it's really quite difficult to embed AI into your business processes and requires a lot of effort and redesign of the processes. People need to understand the process and understand AI and the knowledge used within it. And so we're going to be doing that for quite a while, I think. One of the things, as I said, we found in some companies is they just still don't care about knowledge. AI be damned. They don't really care if it makes it easier to access and use and even create knowledge because they make decisions on the fly anyway. And senior management stakeholders are still needed. AI should provide pointers to people who know about these topics as well as to documents and to specific content. the idea of one big knowledge repository for a large organization, I think hardly ever works. There's some companies that have them. Honeywell, for example, has this huge one called Red that has kind of all different forms of knowledge in it. But I think in general, it's a bad idea. It's better to be focused about it and to, as I say, embed it in the workflow. AI typically can't decide what's the best knowledge. You still need humans for that. And we still need to demonstrate how the use of AI-based knowledge management leads to value if it's going to be around for the long run. So with that, I will stop and talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Sure, Tom. Thanks so much. That was almost a mini masterclass on the evolution of KM and AI. I have lots of questions for you, but I'm going to ask you just two. Then I will ask Ved to ask a question, and then I'm going to ask our audience to jump in. Please type in your chat, your questions in the chat window to make it easier for us to cluster questions. My first question for you, Tom, is as an author, you've written more than 20 books. How does it work? Do you keep such good notes that they become books at the end of the year, or do you see what's happening in the market and say, aha, there's a book concept in there, and then the book comes out? How does this work?
Well, they're all written by AI, to be honest. I didn't have anything to do with them. No, some of both, I would say. I mean, usually I will see a topic that I think is emerging in the marketplace, and I'll write an article about it, and people are interested in the article, or I think they're interested anyway. And then, so I'll start a more detailed research project involving interviews and so on. I think now, I haven't really done a great job of using generative AI to help with the books, but in my last book, I didn't produce the one on Agentic AI, but in my book on the new science of customer relationships, we did do some graphics development with AI, and I just did a survey recently of getting economic value from AI, and I had Claude analyze the survey, and it's interesting. I didn't think it could do it because it can't read CSV files of data, but it turns out it could read SPSS data files, which was shocking to me. And so the vendor who did the survey had created an SPSS data file. It did quite a good job. It was kind of like a very smart but very stubborn intern, in that it just would not abandon ideas that I didn't want to be in the report. But anyway, long-winded answer to your question.
Great, thanks, Tom. My next question is more about people-based knowledge, communities-based knowledge. You've talked a lot about data and explicit repositories of data, but a big part of KM is also communities of practice, communities of interest. Where can AI help or not help? What are the limits of AI in that context?
Well, I always had this discussion with my friends in knowledge management, including Larry Prusak, who was not very technological in his orientation. And I certainly believe in communities of practice and tacit knowledge and so on. But my sense is, in general, organizations will be better off if the knowledge that is exchanged in those human communities gets made explicit in some form or other. So, and AI, now many knowledge communities are mediated through technology. And so we can take, the content exchanged in Slack and in emails and so on, and say, what's unique here, what's non-overlapping with other things, and make it available to people who may not have been involved in that knowledge community or couldn't be present for it or something like that. So I certainly think we still need both, but I still argue for as much as possible, unless it's really, I don't know, sensitive or scary to the organization, embedding it into some sort of explicit content if possible.
Great. Thanks, Tom. I'm going to ask Ved to put in his question now, and I'll turn to the chat window and see what I can pull in for the next part. Ved, over to you.
Sure, Nitin. So, Tom, a very simple question. We have seen KM discipline struggle over the last 3 decades to establish itself in organizations. Now we are in the age of AI, and there is a requirement which the end stakeholders have started seeing of needing the business context to be available for AI to work effectively. Right. So what is it that we can do differently to make it a must-have? Because even today, as you rightly said in your talk, that we don't really get the mind share of the stakeholders who matter.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm doing a new project now on how do organizations get ready for AI in terms of their business processes. And there's a company some of you may have heard of. I'm writing this with someone, doing this research with someone from this company. It's called Celonis. It's a German company that does process intelligence, basically extracting information typically from logs of transactional systems to find out how the process is performing and what are the bottlenecks and so on. My guess is they could probably add more about the unstructured elements in the process. Maybe they have. I don't work closely with them, but in talking to their customers in Europe, there's a lot of interest in the process context, and they realize that if we're going to be successful with agentic AI, you need to know, what are the boundaries, what are the rules, who would intervene under certain circumstances, all that contextual information. And Celonis is increasingly defining itself as a company that will manage that contextual information about your business processes. But it's not nearly as popular in the US. And I think particularly in certain parts of Europe, you see more interest in that process-oriented discipline of doing things in the optimal way across the entire organization. In the US, we tend to be, we'll figure it out. We believe in heroics more than in process and detailed knowledge and context. So, I think there is a cultural predisposition to care or not care about that type of knowledge, which is unfortunate. We should all realize how important it is.
So you believe it will remain on the fringes in the foreseeable future?
Well, I mean, in general, I think companies and organizations will perform better if they use that kind of context. And I don't think agentic AI will be successful without it. So, if you want to get the productivity benefits of agentic AI, I think you'll have to use some of that to make it effective. And executives may not care about knowledge, but they do care about productivity and economic value in many cases.
Thanks, Tom. There's a couple of very good questions coming in the chat window. Thanks to everyone for sharing the questions. Let me pick up this one. What are your thoughts on how AI can reflect some of the aspects of intelligence, such as intuition, emotion, judgment, hunches? So how would AI capture some of those aspects, which also help us interpret knowledge?
Well, I think, as if they're still in human heads, for the moment, that type of knowledge is not going to be captured. But if it's expressed, I think we're finding out, for better or worse, that AI can actually do a fairly decent job. We need more guardrails, but it can do a fairly decent job of providing psychological therapy to individuals, and even some degree of romantic relationships. I do not have any romantic relationships with AI, I must confess, but a lot of people do these days. And so I think it's somewhat surprising that models based on statistical prediction can do a pretty good job of creating and understanding, so to speak, that type of very, soft knowledge, if you will. But it does seem to be the case that it's possible. So, as I said, we need to be careful. We need to make sure, because dealing with emotions is a very sensitive thing for us human beings, and we need to make sure that we're not leading people down the wrong paths or whatever. But it seems to be working for a lot of people.
Great, Tom. Couple of other questions. We've talked a lot about the great opportunities that can arise when you combine AI with KM. How about some of the challenges? What do you see, for example, in terms of bias? There's a lot of bias that can creep into the data. And secondly, what about the environmental footprint of AI? It requires so much electricity, grid power, water, and so on. How can we look at these two kinds of things? Bias on the inside and energy from the outside.
Yeah, good question. We can have a whole session about both of those things. I think AI, whether we're talking about I'm sort of on a one-person crusade, I think, to get people not to think that AI was invented on November 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT was announced. And there was a form of AI, I call it analytical AI, some people call it, traditional machine learning, for which bias was a big issue. But whether you're talking about that type of AI or generative AI, the content upon which AI is trained is what dictates the types of predictions or responses you're going to get. And so if AI is trained on knowledge that is biased, it's going to end up being biased. Now, I've always thought, humans are very biased as well. And the good news about AI is that we can at least see what content was used to train it and see if the output is biased. And in humans, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to judge. And we don't know what goes into the human brain to make them biased in the first place. So I'm not sure we're worse off in a world in which AI makes a lot of decisions because we can at least identify and try to correct the bias as compared to what happens with humans. But it doesn't mean we don't need to work on that constantly. And I don't think that current AI vendors are quite as careful about it as they need to be. On the sustainability issue, I did write an article about how large language models use way too much energy. I think it's nutty that we're building these humongous data centers around the world to support generative AI usage. Inference has gotten a lot less expensive over time, and I think it will continue to get less expensive. But I'm actually a proponent now of slowing down the development of generative AI, stopping building all those big, huge data centers that use so much energy and water and so on, until we figure out more, how do we control it? How do we make sure it's not going to put us all out of work? But certainly in the US, I don't see much regulatory movement toward that. There's certainly a consumer backlash that is starting. And ironically, among young people who I can attest use it quite extensively in their school work. But you probably heard about the commencement speakers who were booed when they mentioned AI. Supposedly only 13% of Gen Z people think that AI will cause more good than harm. So there could be a consumer reaction, and I suspect that if companies continue to struggle a bit with getting clear economic value from AI, they will buy less of it, and that may slow down things a bit. But I don't think we're going to get it in the US, at least, and in many other countries from a regulatory perspective.
So, what do you see as the future role for experts and middle managers? Both are coming under pressure from AI because you can get a lot of access to expertise, database, etc. online, and middle managers are squeezed from both sides, top and bottom. How do human beings reconfigure in the org chart?
Well, yeah, we've heard in the past that middle managers were going to be eliminated by technology. It hasn't really happened. So I'm not sure whether that's going to take place. But I do think that the only way to improve your chances of long-term employment is to adopt new technologies, to try to think about how to add value to them, to try to look at where they're useful and where they're not, and to keep up with what the technology is able to do. It's a struggle for me. I like writing books and articles, and it's possible that I could train Agentic AI on my own past content and say, hey, use the Tom Davenport style to create a new article or book. I don't really want to do that, but I probably should. I mean, I should either retire or learn what AI can do to do what I do and how to make it better. I do explore it as much as I can, but I think we all need to spend some time investing in our careers in that way.
That was my last question for you, Tom. Where do you see yourself in the next few years? Do you ever plan to retire, or you want to go back to your hobbies? What are your hobbies? What's going to happen to you in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Well, I don't plan to stop, writing books and articles. Books, I'm not sure people are reading books anymore, and my books over the last few years have sold much less well than my books earlier on, like Working Knowledge and Competing on Analytics and so on. And I think it's not that the books aren't any good. It's just that people aren't buying them as much. But articles, I continue to want to write. I started a Substack set of columns to write about the issue of what AI does to jobs and organizations and so on, because I thought, most external editors were not going to be that interested in hearing my informal comments about that stuff. So I have no plans to retire. I may, take emeritus status, so I don't have to teach quite as much and come up. The problem with teaching AI is you have to come up with a new syllabus every time you teach. It's very, very demanding.
Great. Thanks, Tom. This has been, as I mentioned earlier, a mini masterclass on knowledge and AI. There are still many more questions in the chat window. What we will do is maybe I'll cluster all these questions and send it to you. And if you have time, you can respond by email at your own leisure, and we can share it with this forum of Knowledge Management Global Network. So let me ask Ved to give a vote of thanks and concluding remarks before we sign off in the next minute or so.
Thank you, Madan. So on behalf of KM Global Network and MXR.world, Tom, we are very honored to have you here. And thank you so much for sharing all your experiences and insights right from the early days of knowledge management to the current state of art in Agentic AI. We do look forward to you continuing the good work that you have been doing ever and forever. And I hope you can share the presentation. We had some really good slides over there.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you once more. And thank you everyone for staying through the entire hour that we were fortunate to have Tom with us for. And look forward to seeing you again in the next edition of Knowledge Dialogues. Thank you and have a great day.
The KMGN dialogues will carry on, and MXR.world will carry on with more such sessions. Thanks so much, Tom. God bless.
Sure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.